Hello everyone, good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Hi Christina. Hi Carla, hello everyone. Yes, perfectly? Great, so you don't have to worry if you have problems with your internet connection because this webinar is being recorded. So if something happens and you get disconnected or you struggle with your internet connection, you can watch it later. The people who have registered are going to receive a link so that you can click and watch it. And it's also going to be made available on YouTube. Okay. If the connection gets choppy, and then if you have problems to hear me, let me know, because then it might affect the recording. Okay. I can see that there are some familiar not faces, but familiar names here, right? Because I can't see you. All right. So as you have probably seen, the title of this webinar is The Importance of Language Awareness in Our Continuing Professional Development. And before we start, I have some announcements to make, just a couple of announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank Disal for the invitation, and also the BRAZ-TESOL Teacher Development SIG, the TD SIG, because they have invited me to deliver this webinar, so I am here on behalf of the Teacher Development SIG. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody who's in the room. I hope you enjoy it. My next announcement is about the Southern Cone TESOL event, which is going to take place in Curitiba this year, from the 17th of July to the 20th of July. Have you heard of this event? You can type here in the chat box, and I can see what you're typing. No, yes, no, I haven't. Annalisa says yes. Okay, so this is an international event, and if you want to attend the event, go to the BRAZ-TESOL website so that you can register. If you register in February, the price is cheaper than if you register in March. I know that today is the last day of February, but you can still register. And also the call for proposals was extended, so you can send your proposal until, the deadline is tomorrow, so you can send it until March the 1st. Okay, this is going to be a fantastic event. There's going to be lots of speakers and talks and workshops, and I really hope to see you there. Okay, and then if you have any questions about the event, just you can type in here and I can answer at the end of the presentation. Another thing that I'd like to do before we start is to share with you my email and my Facebook and my Instagram account, so you can find me basically everywhere. So email, Facebook, and Instagram, because I'm going to try to keep an eye on the questions that you may ask. But if for some reason, if I don't answer your question, or if I don't happen to see your question, you can send me a question via email, Facebook, or Instagram. Okay, my email is sergiopantoja@gmail.com. Facebook is facebook.com/sergiopantoja JR, and my Instagram account is @sergiopantojaELT. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me. I'm going to be more than happy to talk to you after the event, but I'm going to do my best so that I can answer all your questions. All right, so now we're going to get started officially. Okay. All right, so what we're going to be doing tonight is 3 points basically that I'm going to address. The first one is, by the end of this talk, we have discussed what language awareness entails. Okay, what language awareness is all about. We have seen how limited language awareness can affect our teaching effectiveness and our career. And finally, we have considered some possible ways to work on it. All right. Okay, so language awareness. Can you tell me how you understand language awareness? I mean, if you were to define it, what exactly does language awareness mean? You can type your answers here in the chat box, and I'll read them. Okay, Rodrigo says it's the level of language knowledge we have as teachers. Great. Okay, I can see that other people are typing. Okay, Claudia says it's how capable of understanding the aspects of language, and Santiago says it's how we experience our second language as teachers. Okay, so let's see how language awareness is normally defined. So Thornbury defines language awareness as explicit knowledge about language. So what he means by that is that if we have good language awareness, not only are we able to use the language, but we're able to, I mean, mostly we're able to talk about the language, to explain things, to name things. And this is what it's meant here by explicit knowledge about the language. Let me give a couple of examples to illustrate that. So as you can see here in the first example, we have a conditional sentence, which is not the most traditional one. And funnily enough, whenever I show my students this sentence and I ask them if they think whether the sentence is correct or not, most of them say that this sentence is wrong. This conditional sentence is wrong because they're not used to seeing will and will both in the if clause and the main clause. But this sentence is grammatically correct. It's grammatically accurate. So it's my language awareness that enables me to explain to my student why this sentence is correct. It's not just a question of listening to the sentence and saying that it sounds correct or that it sounds okay. I'm not saying that intuition is not important, but as English teachers, we should be able to explain to the best of our knowledge how the language works. So again, it's language awareness that allows us to explain why it's possible to use will in both parts of this conditional, why it's correct, and when students can use this kind of conditional sentence. It's also language awareness that allows us to understand, for example, this phenomenon that you have here, this linking sound that we have here when you read say it. So it's our language awareness that helps us explain why we have a linking here between say and it, and why we have a linking what sound between you and are when you say you are. It's also our language awareness that helps us explain why, if you look at these four sentences, you can see that we have farther and further, and both number one and number two are correct. In this case, we can use both farther and further interchangeably. But when it comes to number three and number four, you can see that only one of them is correct. Only further is correct and not further. So the knowledge that we have that helps us, that allows us, or that enables us to explain why these things happen, why one thing is correct and another one isn't, and when students can use one thing instead of another, is what Thornbury describes as explicit knowledge about language. Okay? All right. As much as I love Thornbury's definition, there is one by Andrews, which comes from this book. Teacher Language Awareness. Have you ever seen or read this book? Yep, Rodrigo says yes. No, I haven't. Okay. All right. This book is amazing. So if you have the chance to get hold of it and read it, I'm sure you won't regret. In this book, Andrews. By the way, I had the opportunity to read this book when I was working on my Delta Module 3, which was aimed at language development for teachers. So it was then that I had the chance to read this book from cover to cover, and it has helped me tremendously to understand more about language awareness. But anyways, Andrews has a broader definition of language awareness in comparison with Thornberry's. He describes language awareness, he considers 3 different dimensions when it comes to language awareness. The first one is what he describes as knowledge of language. The second one is knowledge about language. And the last one is knowledge of students. As you can see here, there is a difference when it comes to the prepositions he's using to describe these different types of language. Knowledge of as opposed to knowledge about. So now we're going to take a closer look at each of these knowledge dimensions so that they are clear to you what Andrews is referring to. So what he means by knowledge of language refers to our language proficiency. In other words, how well, how competently we can use English, we can use the language we teach. So it's about how well we can read and understand text, how well we can write, we speak, listen and understand English. So it's language proficiency. What he describes as knowledge about language refers to it's the same as Thornberry's definition. It's our explicit knowledge about language. So in other words, it's how capable we are of naming things and explaining how language works, as some of you have described here in the chat box. And finally, knowledge of students. Here he's talking about the awareness we have of our students' knowledge in relation to English. So let me give you a practical example. You were planning a lesson and you were about to teach, for example, the present perfect. So you have very good language awareness, so you know how English works, and you know how much your students know about English. So this knowledge allows us to anticipate the problems that they may have when they are exposed to the present perfect. And by anticipating these problems, you can teach them more effectively. So this is what he means by knowledge of students. It's more related to language, to the knowledge that students have in relation to the target language, in our case, English. Okay. Now, given the fact that we have these 3, from now on, we're going to stick to this definition, okay, of knowledge of language, about language, and knowledge of students. So, considering these 3 different knowledge dimensions, I would like to pose a question here. In what ways do you think that our teaching effectiveness can be affected by our language awareness or by limited language awareness? So I'm going to give you a few seconds for you to think about it, and you can write your answers, please, here in the chat box. So let's see. Okay, Claudia says that it may be completely affected. I totally agree, Claudia. It can seriously affect our teaching. Okay, can you yeah, I was going to ask you, yeah, think of how, if you can give me some examples. Okay, Christina says that you can't teach what yourself don't know. Exactly. Okay, Santiago says that thinking about the third, which is knowledge of students, if I don't know my students enough, I'll probably fail to reach them. Okay, excellent. So we have some great points here. It can be the difference between a great lesson or a ruined one. Understanding our students. Larissa says that we can't trust confidence to your students if you don't have it. Yes, excellent points. I agree with all of you. And Ana Leticia says that once you understand what you're teaching, it's a way easier for students to learn from you. Okay, great. Let's take a look at some ways in which our teaching can be affected by our language awareness or the lack thereof. Okay, so the first problem, of course, there are many problems. There's a myriad of problems, but I'm going to narrow down to some of the most serious problems. So the first one is to anticipate learners' learning problems. Okay, so if we don't have good knowledge about language and knowledge of students, we may fail, for example, to predict the problems that they may have when they learn something new. So imagine, for example, you're teaching your students what's oftentimes referred to as a real past or language so that they can hypothesize about things. So students may understand, for example, that even though the structure is past, and we know that it doesn't refer to the past, it can be past but not referring to past. So students might believe, because the structure is past, that it's talking about the past. So since we can anticipate that they may have problems with that, it's something that we can take advantage of. And there are lots of other examples. When you're teaching, for example, second conditionals, we can anticipate that students are likely to confuse first and second conditionals. And this knowledge helps us to prevent problems that are likely to arise. The second one, plan lessons that are aimed at the right level. I've seen that many times teachers, in both cases, teachers who use course books and teachers who don't use course books and prepare their own materials. You see, for example, sometimes teachers, when I'm observing lessons, for example, I see that teachers have planned a lesson, and the idea was to work with a specific set of vocabulary. Let's say something related to furniture. So the words that they are working with are very basic, but depending on the task you choose, it can be extremely complex for your students. I remember once I was observing this teacher, and he was teaching a basic level group. So the task was to work on vocabulary related to furniture. And what students had to imagine is that they had just moved to a new apartment, and they had some money to spend on furniture, so they didn't have a lot of money. So the task consists of students choosing the items that they consider the most useful and rank those items from the most useful to the least useful. Okay, that's not a problem, right? Because it's just about deciding. But the second part of the task was to, in pairs, students were supposed to explain to each other and justify why they had made those choices. So can you see the problem? Even though we're working on words that are like basic words, but the task itself is not basic. It's a very intricate one. So when students had to explain and to justify their choices, they couldn't, because the task required much more than vocabulary related to furniture, for instance. It also required language for comparison, and they didn't have it. So it's something that we need to take into account when planning lessons, to know the level of our students and what they can produce at that level. The third point is interpret course book syllabuses and materials. And this is something I believe you do. I mean, whenever you need to teach a lesson, if you use a course book, you may have to supplement it or to adapt it. Or maybe the target language you are working is relevant to your students, but the way the course book presents it is not exactly appealing so you may have to adapt and to make changes. And in order to do that, you have to have a very good language awareness so that you can make all these adaptations and everything that's necessary. The fourth one is to adapt materials to specific needs of the learners. Again, if we use materials, course books, we may need to adapt a unit because maybe what's there is not 100% relevant for our students. So we need to consider other ways of approaching a particular unit or a particular task. And then again, we need to use our knowledge of language and our knowledge of students so that we can do that to the best of our abilities. Number 5, to deal effectively with errors. And as someone has mentioned here, how can you teach someone something you don't know, right? And this reminds me of Jonathan said, I'm always adapting course books. Yes, Jonathan, we always have to do that, to adapt course books by taking our students into consideration, right? Because the course book, as we know, it's just a tool. It's just another tool, as we have like several other tools out there. The course book is another one of them. So it does require adaptation, and it needs to be supplemented at times. Okay, so back to number 5, to deal effectively with errors. So as someone has pointed out, if you don't know something, how can you teach it? Or if you don't know something, how can you correct? How can you give feedback to your students if you're not able to identify that what your student has made was a mistake? So see the point here. And I remember once observing a lesson, and there was this student making a mistake consistently. And then by the end of the lesson, while I was talking to the teacher, I asked why she hadn't corrected the student, and she said that she hadn't realized that the student was making a mistake. So that can be a problem, because if you don't know enough about the language you're teaching, chances are that your students are going to keep making mistakes, and those mistakes are going to go unnoticed, because I mean, even you yourself cannot identify them. And I would add here that it's not just a question of mistakes, but it's a question of helping students reformulate what they're saying in a more natural way, more effectively. Because sometimes the students may produce sentences, or they may say something that it's comprehensible, but there is a better way of saying that, of expressing that idea. And as teachers, we can help them express their ideas as effectively as possible. So it may not be a mistake, but there might be a better way or a more natural way to have said that. Number 6, to earn the confidence of the learners. I think that most of our students, they see us as role models, because we just like them, we went through the same process of learning a language, right? I believe that most of us here are not native speakers of English. English is not our first language, so we had to study in order to learn it and to acquire it. So we know what it's like to go through the process of learning a foreign language. So I have the impression that most students see ourselves or see us as models. So in order to gain their confidence, we must be able to explain things clearly, accurately. We must be able to use the language competently, because they see us as people who have achieved, right, a level that is so high that enables us to teach it. And I think that if we fail to earn our students' confidence, I don't think that we're likely to make much progress. Right? If our students doubt doubt us as professionals, I think that can be a big problem for us. And the last one is to present a new language clearly and efficiently. We all know that when we are talking about grammar, for example, when we are clarifying language, we should do that as clearly as possible and as efficiently as possible, not to spend a lot of time, rambling on and on about the rules with regard to reported speech, for example. So the idea is to be very effective as well as efficient. But in order to be able to do that, we must have a very deep knowledge about the language. We must plan in advance what we're going to teach. So you can see that in all the cases that we have here, language awareness play a huge role in the success of our lessons, in our teaching. All right, so Fabio says that the only problem is when we must follow a curriculum and students' proficiency is very low. Yes, Fabio, and then we may need to adapt. All right. Okay, given the fact that I believe most of us here, if not all of us, are non-native English-speaking teachers, so English is not our first language, I would like you to consider these three different types of knowledge: knowledge of language, knowledge about language, and knowledge of students. And think for a moment, for us, teachers that are non-native English-speaking teachers, which one do you think that poses the biggest challenge for us? Is it knowledge of language, so language proficiency, knowledge about language to be able to explain, name things, how the language works, or knowledge of students? Okay, so type in your answers here. Let's see which one you think is the most challenging for us. Okay, Jonathan says knowledge about the culture. Santiago says that as a non-native, I believe that number 2 is the most difficult one. So knowledge about language. Adriana says sometimes knowledge of language, so language proficiency. Some points are trick. Adriana says tricky, yeah. Rodrigo says, in my opinion, all of them are complex challenges. However, the first one, knowledge of language, yes. Also number 2. Okay. Right. So what research shows is that for us, non-native English-speaking teachers, the knowledge here that tends to be the most challenging is number 1. It's knowledge of language or language proficiency. Because there are a lot of teachers who are non-native speakers who know a lot about grammar. Of course, that there's always room for improvement, and we're always working on our knowledge of methodology, pronunciation, and everything. But non-native English teachers tend to have a very good knowledge about the language because that's how we learned, right? We studied the language, so it makes it's easier for us to know how the language works. But what research shows is that the first one poses the biggest challenge. It's knowledge of language or language proficiency, and there are many reasons for that. We're going to see them in a minute. So from this point to the end of this webinar, I'm going to place more emphasis on this type of knowledge, okay? Language proficiency. And that's for this reason, because this is the one that for us poses the biggest challenge. All right. Does anybody here know this man? Yes, Christina says yes, Melissa says no. No, yep, okay. So those of you who know him, who is he? Not really? That's right, Christina, he's a Hungarian teacher. And his name is Peter Matyes. His surname is incredibly difficult to pronounce. I went through my whole Delta Module 3 mispronouncing the last name until one day I watched the video on YouTube where he introduces himself and then he pronounces his name correctly. And then I learned that it's Magish, not Magis, as I used to pronounce. One of the reasons why he's important is that in 1994, he wrote a book called The Non-Native Teacher. If you haven't seen or read this book yet, I strongly recommend that you check it out. It's great, very comprehensive, and I'm sure that you can learn one thing or two by reading this book. So The Non-Native Teacher. This is the new edition, by the way. This is the new cover. It was released back in 2017, but the first edition came out in 1994. Christina says, I have the first edition. Fantastic, Christina. Yes, I have the new one. Another thing that Magish did in 1994 was to conduct a survey entitled Self-Perceptions of Non-Native English-Speaking Teachers. What he did was he interviewed 216 English teachers from 10 different countries, and 92% of them described themselves as non-native English-speaking teachers. Okay, so we see that we have a good number of teachers here, right? 216 English teachers is a lot of teachers, different countries, and I'm going to show you some of the results. But before I show you, I'm going to ask you to guess. Okay. In your opinion, what's the percentage of English teachers who admitted to having difficulties with the English language? And the second point is, what's the percentage of teachers who admitted that their language difficulties had hampered their teaching effectiveness? Okay, so you can type your answers here in the chat box and have a look at them. So Santiago says that 65% and 82% admitted that their language difficulties had hampered their teaching. 60%, Pedro says. Okay, Larissa says 50-50. Okay, Leandro says about 80% and 50. Okay, 70 and 90. Well, you're close. So let me show you the results of this survey. So actually, 84% admitted to having difficulties with the English language, and 75 or nearly 75% admitted that their language difficulties had hampered their teaching effectiveness. So it's as you can see, this is a serious problem. We're not talking about the minority, but it's the vast majority of non-native English-speaking teachers who feel that somehow their language proficiency or language awareness affected them. And they have both difficulties with English itself, as well as with teaching. I mean, as a consequence of their low level of proficiency or their limited language awareness. Yes, so your answers are pretty close. Okay. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the reason behind some of these problems. Well, I'm sure you can probably think of many, right? The fact that we live in a country where English is not the spoken language. People don't. It's not our first language here, so you don't get to speak with other people all the time. We talk to our students and we use English to teach, but it's not really. I mean, I would argue here. My contention is that when we are teaching, we're not really practicing our English, so to speak. And let me show you why. I believe that you're very familiar with this word, fossilization, right? So when you hear this word, fossilization, what do you normally associate it with? in our ELT context, English language teaching context. Larissa says mistakes. Yes. That's right, Larissa. When you say that a student has made a mistake for so long that the mistake has become fossilized, right? Gustavo says that students keep making the same mistake all the time. That's right, Gustavo. And then the students are not corrected or they don't receive feedback. And then as a result, the mistake becomes fossilized. Claudia says errors that cannot be corrected anymore. Okay, so I can see clearly here that you associate the word fossilization with mistakes, right? Interestingly, we can also, as teachers, we can also go through this problem, the problem of fossilization, related to our English. Farrell says that this problem stems from the fact that since the teacher is typically teaching students of limited language proficiency, the teacher's own classroom language is likely to be intentionally simplified in order to facilitate comprehension. After all, we want to give our students comprehensible input, right? We want them to understand what we're saying. And in order to do that, we have to rough tune. We have to speak in a way that they can understand us. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense to speak English with our students. And then he goes on and says that while the teacher's strategy of providing learners with comprehensible input is desirable from the learner's point of view, it can also promote a type of fossilization in the teacher's own language. So that's what he means by fossilization, or when our English becomes fossilized. And finally, over time, due to the restricted type of English they use, or we use in the classroom, their restricted opportunities to use or hear normal English, their own English fails to develop. Yes. I believe that if you teach mostly basic students for some time, you probably feel like that, because as we need to adapt the language you use, we need to speak in a way that is comprehensible. After some time, as we don't have opportunities to use English or to speak about more sophisticated topics, we feel that our English starts deteriorating. Yeah. Have you ever felt like this? Okay. A lot of people say yes. Yep. Christina says, when I used to teach A1 students, yes, so low-level learners, right? Larissa says no, she has never felt like that. Okay, great. Daniela says that, yes, I've been making some silly mistakes that I didn't used to make before. Yeah. I think this is what happens, Daniela. I think that if we keep teaching basic students and basic students alone for a long time, we somehow get contaminated by the mistakes that students make, because we are exposed to mistakes all the time, right? And on the other hand, we're not exposed to higher level English. Claudia says, yes, that's why teaching different levels promotes our own development. Yeah. And Leandro adds that, yes, I've talked to several teachers who say they don't feel their English is improving because they only teach low levels. Okay. And Daniela asks, how can we improve this? Okay, Daniela, we're going to have a look at some possibilities here. Right. But before we get into that, so far we've been talking about how knowledge of language, right? Language proficiency can affect our teaching, why it may happen. And now we're going to talk about our career and our continuing professional development. So I'd like you to think about now, because so far we've been focusing on teaching, right? How our knowledge of English can affect our teaching effectiveness. Now, let's think for a moment about our career and our continuing professional development. Can you think, before I show you the next slide, some of the ways in which our career can be affected by our knowledge of English or limited language awareness? Let's see if you can come up with some of the examples that I'm going to show you on the next slide. I think it takes some time for me to get your answers. But I can see that you're typing. Okay, so Santiago is asking me to repeat my question, so let me repeat it. Santiago, I'd like you to consider ways in which our career and our continuing professional development can be affected by our limited proficiency level or knowledge or language awareness. Christina says fewer opportunities to move up the ladder. Participating in meetings is very difficult because you can't express yourself. Yes, absolutely. We can lose opportunities of teaching higher level groups, Larissa says. Yes, definitely, Larissa. If you look at this slide, you're going to see that I have selected 4 problems or 4 challenges, right? Let's put it this way. So if our knowledge of English, in other words, our language proficiency is low, if it's low, it can affect us in different ways, right? For instance, we'll not be able to teach a wide range of levels. So this is something that you have probably seen and or experienced firsthand when you started teaching, right? This is something that happened to me when I started teaching a long time ago. My level of English used to be really low. When I set foot in the classroom, my level of English used to be B1 level, right? And I know that for a fact because I had just passed a PET exam, which is now called Cambridge English Preliminary. So if you teach B1 level learners, if you have prepared students for a PET exam, a Cambridge English Preliminary, you know what I'm talking about because you know exactly what a B1 student can produce, right? So when I started teaching, I used to have that level. And I remember facing lots of problems. Yes, Larissa says I used to be an FCE student. Yes, my level of English was even below that, Larissa. So when I started teaching as a consequence of my level of English, I would always teach beginners. Now, you know, in hindsight, I don't think that I should have started teaching. I should have waited and become better, but that's not what happened, right? And I think that the important thing is to keep improving always. But anyways, so our level of English is limited. We're not going to be asked to teach more advanced levels. So we're going to be stuck always teaching the same levels. And as Christina said, we're not going to move the career ladder. And we're also going to miss lots of opportunities, right? Because the great thing about being a teacher is that you can teach different levels and you can meet different students. And I think that depending on the level we have, we always keep teaching the same levels again and again and again. So if we are to be able to teach all the levels, or maybe you don't want to teach all the levels, maybe you want to teach, for example, up to B2 or C1, but still, to teach an advanced level, to teach a C1 level group, you need to have a very good level of English and language awareness, obviously. So this is the first problem that I have considered. The second one has to do with jobs, right? When you look at job ads nowadays, you can see that most schools, especially the most prestigious schools in the country, they require either a C1 or a C2 level of English, which is a high level. Nowadays in Brazil, there, bilingual schools are springing up, spreading all over the place. And from time to time, I see ads on LinkedIn, and they are asking for English teachers with a C1 or C2 level of English. So I think that it's hard nowadays to find a good job, to find to get a job in a prestigious school if you have a very low level of English. So that's another reason for us to keep improving. The third point, as you can see here, is it's not about books per se, but it's about knowledge. Here you can see two books: Second Language Acquisition and Reading the Second Language. So these books are more technical books. They're not so general. And I think that in order for us to be able to read these books and to gain more knowledge about the field, to understand things maybe deeper, we need to be able to read this kind of books and this kind of literature. And if our level of English is very limited, because this is something that I have experienced firsthand. As I told you before, when I started teaching, my level was B1, right? So I remember trying to read a book back then called Teaching by Principles. This is a book by Douglas Brown. I don't know if you've ever seen or read it. This book is great, but it's slightly more difficult than some of the books that we are used to reading, for example, such as the how-to series, which are all fantastic books, but the language is more accessible. So when we read these books, we feel that if our level of English is not good enough, we're not even able to understand the messages that the authors are conveying. And this is something that happened to me. So and then a few years later, because I told you that was the beginning of my career, I tried to read that book at first. I didn't succeed. A few years later, I tried to read it again, and then I was finally able to understand it properly. So it had to do with my level of English. And finally, the CELT is just an example here. I just chose the CELT course because I know that it's a course that most teachers are familiar with. But sometimes, due to our low level of proficiency, we're not even able to apply for certain courses. I know some teachers, for example, who have tried to take the CELT, but they were rejected, because in order for you to take the CELT, you must have a C1 level of English. You don't have to have a CA certificate, a Cambridge English Advanced Certificate, which proves that your level of English at C1, but you need to find a way to prove that you have a C1 level. And the tutor, for example, can interview you and check whether you have the right level of English, so that you can make the most of the course. And I know teachers that have been rejected. They were not allowed to take the course because their level of English was not quite there yet. So it puzzles me, because you see teachers that want to improve, they want to learn more about methodology, but at the same time, they don't have enough English so that they can keep up with the course. All right, so given everything we have discussed so far, what can we do about it? There is a great suggestion which was put forth by Farrell, the same author who talks about the fossilization process. And Farrell says that in order for the teacher's language to improve, opportunities are needed to what Swen calls pushed output, that require the teacher to reshape his or her language and to use more complex structures and a wide range of vocabulary. Okay, this is ideal, right? I think like this is the would be the perfect example of how we can improve our English, how we can, if we have opportunities to use English at a higher level, and also receive feedback on our grammar, on our vocabulary, so that we can say things more effectively, even if we're not. But these conditions may be not so easy to be met, because I think that it works perfectly if you're taking a course, for example. So if you're taking a course, for example, to prepare for an exam, or if you're taking a language development course, so you have someone to listen to you, to provide you with opportunities for you to use the language at a higher level and to give you feedback. Or maybe if you have a more competent peer who can talk to you and who can give you feedback. But I have to admit that it's not easy for everybody, right? To have someone to help you improve your English. But there are other things we can do. And I'm sure that you're sick and tired of listening to people saying that in order for you to improve your English, because this is something we also tell our students, right? That for us to improve our English, you should read more books, magazines, blogs, a wide range of texts, different genres. We should watch films, TV series, listen to podcasts, work on our grammar, get a grammar book and vocabulary book, a pronunciation book, and work on them. I think that this is something that everybody knows, right? I'm not saying anything to you here that's brand new or reinventing the wheel. But the thing is, even though we know, it doesn't translate into doing. So knowing what to do doesn't mean that we're doing that. And most of the time, when you talk to teachers and we share tips on how to improve, one of the main problems they raise is time. And definitely time is a problem. This is something that I cannot disagree with. We all have problems when it comes to time. But as Igor Cavalcante says, right, we're never going to get more free time. So chances are that we need to make time because we're always taking more courses and you're always teaching more students. So I don't think that time is something that we're likely to have more in the future. Hopefully we will, but we may not. So I think that we need to try to do something by using the time we have, right? And it's not just a question of pointing out things that teachers can do, that we can do in order to improve, but also to consider something else that may be even more important than time, which is habit formation. We always tell our students to listen to podcasts, to watch TV shows, to watch Netflix, to watch TED videos, right? But the thing here is, it has to be done consistently. I think it's pointless, for example, if we study for a week very intensively, but then we don't study for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So it has to be done consistently. And if you think about it, it's just creating a new habit. It's about developing habits. And this is a topic that really interests me because I try to read as much as I can, intensively, extensively. Unfortunately, I'm not able, for example, to read every day, but I try to read many times a week, as much as I can. But it all comes down to developing new habits. So this question is very pertinent. How long does it really take to build a new habit? So if you want, for example, to read books 3 or 4 times a week, every week, if you want to work on your vocabulary consistently, if you want to listen to podcasts. And this health psychologist researcher, Philippa Lally at University College London, she went deeper into this question. So let me tell you a little bit about her research. So her study examined the habits of 96 people over a 12-week period. Each person chose one new habit for the 12 weeks, and reported each day on whether or not they did the behavior and how automatic the behavior felt. And I think it's so interesting because the habits ranged from going to the gym to start reading more often, and also things like eating more healthily. And now I'd like to pose another question here. So remember the question? Let me go back to this slide. How long does it really take to build a new habit? So if you want to develop the habit of working on your English, of listening to podcasts, of reading, on average, how long do you think it will take you so that it becomes a habit? 12 weeks? So the whole period, Santiago? 21 days? Gustavo says that according to certain books, it takes 21 days to build a new habit, but sometimes take more than 30 days. Okay, Paulo asks over 6 months, 12 weeks, let's say 3 weeks, 30 days. Okay, so let's have a look at what she found out. Okay, she has discovered that on average it takes more than 2 months before a new behavior becomes automatic. On average, some habits take longer to be created, of course, but on average over 2 months, and to be more precise, 66 days, right? So if we are to start working on our English more consistently, we need to develop new habits, because otherwise it's going to be a one-off thing. So next week we are all motivated to strive and to become better, and then we start reading and then we stop. So now we know that it takes time to develop habits, and it's all about developing habits, right? And this is another challenge that we have. I think that you've already felt that when you decided to go to the gym, right? So it's not something that most people do willingly, but we know it's important to do exercise. I mean, to do whatever exercise you want, but it has to become a habit, because it's not easy for everybody. And I think the same happens to language development. It has to become a habit. And another point which I consider of paramount importance is what Natalia Guerrero. Does everybody know Natalia Guerrero? Yes, yes. Yes, Claudia. She's a great professional. Okay, last year Natalia Guerrero wrote a post for Richmond Share, whose title was Teacher Language Development. I'm starting with the woman in the mirror. Okay, let me check one thing before I move on. I continue here. Can you all hear me okay? Because I got a message here. Yes? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So she wrote this article for Richmond Share, starting with the woman in the mirror. And one thing that she says that really, really struck a chord with me was, we all have our sore spots in terms of language proficiency. Hopefully, they change along our language learning history as we study, practice the language, learning more, find other areas that need improvement, address those, and so on and so forth. However, to better work on our language difficulties, first we need to recognize they're there. And I think that this is the most important thing. We must be able to understand that I know it sounds cliche, but there's always room for improvement, like always. And I mean, regardless of how proficient you are, how competent you are, we can always learn something new. We can always improve. And there are lots of different areas to be improved, right? We can start to work more on our pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary. But this is the first step. First, we need to identify that there is a problem, and this problem must be dealt with. Okay, so everyone, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Was great to have you here to spend the night talking to you about language awareness. This is one of my favorite topics ever. And here's my email again, my Facebook and my Instagram. I'm so sorry if you have typed something here and I haven't seen your question. Please send me your questions. I will answer them. This presentation is a bit longer, so I had to cut it short because I know that I had only an hour. Fabiana asked, will we have more meetings like this? Yes, Fabiana, Disal offers webinars frequently. So stay tuned that I'm sure that there are others in line here. Okay, so before I leave, does anyone have any questions? Thanks, Gustavo. I'm really glad that you have loved it. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everyone. Okay, Christina says that she has lots of questions, but not right now. Christina, you have me on, I'm on Facebook, right? You have me on Facebook, so send me your questions. I'll be more than happy to talk to you and to answer your questions. Oh, and remember that the call for papers, the deadline is tomorrow. So if you're still torn whether you should send your proposal or not, I encourage you to go ahead and do it. And I'm sure that you're going to have a wonderful time presenting at the BRAZ-TESOL. Okay? All right. So everyone, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.